Bonjour mes amis, aujourd'hui nous allons regarder les différences entre l'imparfait et le passé composé. Après, vous devriez avoir un peu de compréhension pour décider si une phrase indiquée c'est l'imparfait ou le passé composé. Allez, on y va. Les grandes idées, the big ideas. So, both the imparfait and the passé composé describe actions in the past. So if it's not talking in the past, we probably don't need these two. However, even though they are both in the past, there are clear differences to know when we should use each one. We can't just exchange them just because we feel like it. There are very distinct reasons why we would use one over the other. And with that said, it is possible, and we're going to look at some examples today, that you will use both of these tenses in the same sentence. So those big ideas out of the way, let's get started. First, le poster. Copy this poster. Pause this video right now and copy this. I'll wait. Okay, I'm hoping you pause it. So, we're looking at the difference between imparfait and passé composé. And this chart pretty much just gives you a side-by-side comparison and explanation of why you would use one over the other. And we're going to take a look at each one of these comparisons more specifically and look at some examples in English, because you have to understand the differences in English in order to be able to understand the differences in French. So we're really just concentrating on understanding the difference between the two. We do have an imperfect in English. It's just that you haven't really been explained or taught the differences between these two, because we also have these other past tenses that we use to describe other things. But we're going to co-focus specifically at the difference between the imparfait and the passé composé. Okay, the first rule is was verbing used to verb versus I verbed, I did verb, or I have verbed. So if you notice, you look at this chart and you'll see imparfait. I was running. I used to swim. I was reading. Those would all be in the imparfait. So you notice that if typically, rule of thumb, if you would say in English, I was verbing, then you probably need the imparfait, because there isn't really another verb tense in French that would use that kind of translation. So I was verbing would use the imparfait. Likewise, if you would say I used to verb, which if you're really just trying to say something like that, you would use the imparfait. However, if we were just saying I verbed, I did verb, I have verbed, you might, more likely than not, have to use the passé composé. But we're going to see plenty of exceptions to that idea. So this first rule is really meant to help you understand that if it was verbing, you know you need to use the imparfait. If it's anything else, you might have to dig a little deeper to decide which one it is. But was verbing, pretty much most of the time, will be the imparfait. Down to the second rule, habitual or interrupted action versus one-time or completed action. This one's kind of a 2-for-1. There's two ideas in each of these that we have to understand. So habitual or interrupted versus one-time or completed. I studied every afternoon. So that was something I did on a habit in the past. Notice it's I studied, which goes against the previous rule we just said. However, the detail every afternoon tells me it was a habit. It happened repeatedly, so I would use the imparfait instead. So it's a habit. It's habitual. I did the dishes in the evening. Again, in the evening is habitual. We're talking about every night. So it would be the imparfait. Again, because it's happening habitually. It happened more than once and it was the same action each time. Versus passé, I studied yesterday. It only happened one time, yesterday, so that would be passé composé. And I did the dishes last week, so we're only talking about one time last week. So again, that would use the passé composé. So that should help you understand that between habitual, it happened over and over and over again, versus it only happened one time, then it would be passé composé. On the bottom, I have these two pieces that go together. I was napping when the rain started. So you have, this is interrupted versus completed. So what was happening? I was napping. What interrupted The napping, oh, the rain. So the thing that was interrupted, I was napping, would be the imparfait. The thing that interrupted it, the completed action, would be the passé composé. So I was napping would be imparfait. When the rain started would be passé composé. So again, in that sentence, I was napping when the rain started, that would use both tenses in the same sentence. But the difference being what was happening already and what interrupted it. That is how you tell the difference between interrupted and completed actions. Okay. Okay, and now we're to the very bottom, background detail versus action of the story. This only makes sense when you're thinking about the whole composition that you're working with, whether it's a paragraph, a sentence, two sentences. This is really the comparison and contrast aspect of imparfait and passé composé, and also it really if you just understand background detail versus action of the story, the other two rules that we've looked at don't really matter. As long as you can master this last one, you should be able to, with very good accuracy, be able to decide, do you need imparfait or passé composé? So now let's take a look at it. So look at the sentences we have on the left. It was a dark and stormy night. She was spooky. Her name was Bloody Mary. They're different sentences. They're all using was, sure, which is a one big key for us. But more importantly, what do they do in terms of me telling a story? Do they tell me what happened or do they tell me about the story? So since it gives me background details or background information, setting, character, names, these details that help me understand my story, I'm going to use the imparfait. Whereas in the passé composé, the phone rang in the hallway. She appeared in the mirror. She murdered anyone who said her name. I'm using the Bloody Mary legend, by the way. So those are actions of the story. What happened first? What happened second? What happened third? If it answers that question or a question like it, then you're going to need the passé composé. So the imparfait is for our descriptions, and the passé composé is for our actions. So you take your actions of the story. What happened first, second, or third? Passé composé. Anything you add to make those details, to make those story, what happened more interesting, connect them together, etc., that's probably going to be the imparfait. So imparfait are background details. Passé composé are actions. That goes back to our previous rule. What was happening is just a detail. I was napping. That's just a description, if we really think about it. When the rain started, well, the rain started is my action. So I've got the imparfait versus passé composé in there as well. So you can start to see that some of the rules kind of mix together. Okay. Imparfait or passé composé, taking a look at some of these sentences. I started my homework. Would that be imparfait or passé composé? Is it I was verbing versus I verbed? Is it talking about something I got interrupted or I did repeatedly? Or is it talking about something I only did once and finished? Is it giving me a description of the story or is it giving me the action of a story? I started my homework. If you said passé composé, you are correct. I played in the park on Wednesdays. I played in the park on Wednesdays. All right. Let's see. Are we using I was verbing? I used to verb. I did verb. I verbed. Are we talking about something that was habitual or something that we only did once? Are we talking about something that got interrupted? Are we talking about the completed or interrupting action? Are we talking about a description of the story or an action of the story? If you said imparfait, you are correct. I used to play the piano. That one should be easy. Is that going to be imparfait or passé composé? If you said imparfait, you are correct. All right, the next one, we have 2 for 1. She was watching TV when I came home. Which one was the descriptive action and which one is the action of the story? Or which one was already happening and then got interrupted by the other action? So she was watching TV. If you think that should be imparfait, you are correct. And if you saw when I came home and you said that should be passé composé, then you are also correct. They died from disease and malnutrition. Imparfait or passé composé? It should be passé composé. It was a beautiful day. Are we giving a description to our story or talking about an action of the story? then that means we know it should be imparfait. They went on a picnic. Is that a description of my story or an action of my story? It should be passé composé. So I hope this video, please feel free to review it and look at the sentences again and again. And we're going to be playing with it in class as well, of course. But we are going to be working on mastering the difference between imparfait and passé composé. A bientôt!